This is the story of a closed oak door and unsigned constitutional draft. And the exact moment Queen Camilla realised her crown does not grant her the authority to rewrite the British Constitution, in less than 24 hours, the carefully constructed illusion of her supreme institutional control was quietly and ruthlessly dismantled outside the Privy Council chamber. What Queen Camilla just realised behind closed doors is that a title allows you to wear historic velvet, wave to the cameras and sit on a gilded throne. But true sovereign hard power resides exclusively in unbroken bloodlines, strict constitutional law, and the silent enforcement of the true heirs. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the highly audacious, secret constitutional coup she recently attempted under the cover of administrative restructuring. We will expose how a clandestine maneuver to alter the Regency Act and secure a permanent seat of state authority inadvertently triggered a freezing institutional retaliation engineered by Prince William and Princess Anne. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand the devastating realization currently paralyzing the Queen that, despite sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the social hierarchy, she has been legally and permanently locked out of the core machinery of the state. To fully grasp the magnitude of this internal palace warfare, we must first step back and analyze the monumental 30-year manipulation that brought Camilla to this modern peak of social supremacy. For 3 decades, she executed the longest, most forensic game of reputational rehabilitation in British history. She survived the bitter public ruin of the 1990s, systematically softened the global memory of Princess Diana's tragedy, and patiently replaced legacy palace officials with her own dedicated loyalists. When she was officially crowned queen, discarding the restrictive consort caveat entirely, she believed she had achieved an absolute, unshakable mandate. She operated under the fundamental belief that her psychological control over King Charles was synonymous with control over the state itself. She felt entirely untouchable, assuming that the sprawling machinery of the crown would always bend to her personal legacy agenda. But the fatal flaw in Camilla's complex architecture of power is that it is built entirely on a borrowed timeline, completely isolated from the enduring constitutional bloodline of the future king. That dangerous illusion of absolute authority collided with a brutal reality just days ago, driven by a profound institutional desperation within Camilla's private office. As the realities of King Charles's ongoing health battles and a transitional reign become impossible to ignore, a deep-seated paranoia has taken root within the Queen's inner circle. Fearing that her immense public relevance and internal influence would instantly evaporate the moment the crown inevitably shifts to the next generation, her senior advisors attempted an unprecedented administrative maneuver. Behind the scenes, during a quiet shift in the Cabinet Office schedule, ahead of a scheduled Privy Council meeting, Camilla's legal team quietly drafted a highly sophisticated confidential policy memorandum. What appears to be true, according to high-level constitutional leaks, is that this document was a highly calculated attempt to alter the internal mechanics of the Regency Act. Under the carefully sanitized guise of institutional efficiency and providing absolute stability for the monarch during periods of acute vulnerability, the draft sought to elevate Camilla to the unprecedented status of co-regent or grant her explicit legally binding veto power within the Privy Council. It was a silent, systematic attempt to ensure that if the king's capacity to govern were to decline, Camilla would not be sidelined as a mere dowager queen. Instead, she would hold a constitutional stranglehold over state decisions, effectively forcing the future king, Prince William, to seek her administrative approval for sovereign decrees. She assumed she could quietly slip this draft into the heavy stack of routine administrative updates, firmly believing that during a time of heightened family sensitivity, the bureaucracy would simply comply in silence out of deference to her title. She severely underestimated the cold forensic vigilance of Princess Anne and the absolute protective apparatus surrounding Prince William. The discovery of this secret constitutional grab did not manifest through a dramatic confrontation, but through the meticulous monitoring of state paperwork, Princess Anne, possessing the fierce, unyielding institutional memory of the crown, and serving with absolute dedication as a Councillor of State, routinely audits the upcoming agendas of the Privy Council. When her office cross-referenced the newly submitted Cabinet Office brief, the anomalous constitutional amendment immediately flagged as an existential threat to the true bloodline. Anne recognised this not as a harmless administrative adjustment, but as a parasitic encroachment upon the sovereign rights of her nephew. She took the paper trail directly to Prince William, and together they saw the undeniable forensic proof of a shadow queen attempting to hijack the British Constitution for personal survival. The retaliation from the future king and the Princess Royal was executed with a freezing, ruthless legality that used the very weight of constitutional law as a weapon. Prince William did not leak the attempted coup to the press, nor did he allow his office to engage in an undignified shouting match within the palace corridors. He utilized the system to execute a silent, devastating counterstrike. Operating with unprecedented constitutional leverage as the heir apparent, William quietly coordinated a strict, binding administrative update with the Lord President of the Council and senior constitutional advisors. They activated a rigid, unyielding protocol dictating that absolutely no structural alterations to the Regency framework or sovereign decision-making processes could even be presented to the Privy Council without the prior physical co-signature of the direct heir to the throne. Without a single word spoken in anger, William legally and permanently severed Camilla's access to the state apparatus. The execution of this silent retaliation resulted in an absolute historic visual humiliation for the Queen behind closed doors. On the afternoon of the highly anticipated Privy Council meeting, as Camilla's senior legal advisors and private secretaries approached the heavy oak doors of the council chamber, carrying the finalized draft of the amendment, they did not find a welcoming committee. Instead, they hit an invisible, impenetrable wall of state protocol. The security details and senior council clerks, operating under direct binding instructions from William's administrative office, politely but firmly halted the Queen's staff. In front of the Prime Minister and assembled state officials, the clerks informed her legal team that their credentials for this specific agenda item had been permanently revoked. What looked like a routine administrative check was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's constitutional empire. The draft document was quietly but decisively removed from the dispatch boxes, rendered completely null and void before it could ever reach the King's desk. As the reality of the locked door and the shelved document was relayed back to Clarence House, Camilla experienced a wave of cold, suffocating panic. That detail matters immensely because it marks the precise moment the grand illusion shattered. Stripped of her illusion of absolute control, constitutionally walled off by her stepson, and publicly disciplined without a single word being spoken, she realized the trap had snapped shut. Her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently exposed her total lack of foundational hard power. Terrified by the sudden collapse of her authority over the state machinery, Camilla retreated to the one remaining card she had left to play. She went directly to King Charles, presenting the rejected draft and demanding that he use his supreme sovereign power to crush William's administrative blockade. The entire future of the modern monarchy now hangs in the heavy, suffocating silence of the King's study as the Queen stands waiting for her husband to speak. The heavy, suffocating quiet of the King's study did not break with an outburst of anger or a defensive royal decree. Instead, King Charles simply looked down at the rejected constitutional draft, his silence delivering a far more devastating blow to Queen Camilla than any reprimand ever could. For decades, Charles had been her ultimate protector, burning through his own political capital and turning his back on public opinion to shield her from the consequences of their shared history. He had fought his mother, his closest advisors, the British press, and his own children to force Camilla's acceptance into the absolute center of the royal fold. She fully expected that in this moment of acute administrative humiliation, Charles would summon Prince William, activate his supreme sovereign authority, and deliver a crushing reprimand to his heir. She expected the king to remind his son that Camilla was the crowned queen, and that her organizational demands must be met to preserve the unified front of the crown. But she encountered something far more terrifying than sovereign rage. She encountered a devastating absolute silence. What appears to be true, according to those familiar with the internal dynamics of the king's household, is that Charles simply refused to intervene. He did not yell. He did not defend his wife's aggressive attempt to alter the Regency framework. And he did not order the restoration of the policy memorandum. He looked at the restricted access logs, sat in the suffocating quiet of his office, and did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for structural power, and it ended with a freezing realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the king, and as the monarch, facing his own profound vulnerabilities and the fragile, transitional state of his reign, his primary overriding duty is the survival and integrity of the crown. Charles knows with forensic clarity that the stability of the institution is its only true anchor. To override the Prince of Wales in order to secure an artificial constitutional veto or a co-regency status for Camilla would be an act of institutional suicide. To publicly or privately dismantle William's invocation of sovereign protection would signal a divided, chaotic monarchy that allows the king's spouse to cannibalize the operational foundation of the heir apparent. Charles is acutely aware that he is a transitional monarch and the future of the dynasty belongs entirely to the direct bloodline. In that singular moment of absolute silence, the king chose the long-term survival of the institution over the personal ambition of his wife's inner circle. Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life: the king will no longer save her from the Prince of Wales. This silent betrayal exposed the terrifying architecture of Camilla's reality, forcing her to confront a landscape of pure commercial and institutional desperation. To the global public, she is a queen draped in historic velvet, riding in gilded carriages and waving from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. But behind the closed doors of the palace, the forensic financial reality is that Camilla owns virtually nothing of the royal estate. The vast real estate, the liquid wealth, and the billion-dollar corporate empire of the Duchy of Cornwall belong entirely and exclusively to Prince William. The grand residences are tied directly to the sovereign state. If the reign of King Charles were to unexpectedly end, Camilla would instantly transform into a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the new monarch, completely dependent on her stepson's administrative goodwill for her housing, her income, and her security. Her frantic attempt to rewrite the Regency Act was never just about a routine administrative update. It was a frantic, calculated maneuver to secure a permanent constitutional foothold and independent political legitimacy before her ultimate protector is gone. She knew that without King Charles, she would instantly become a temporary guest in an empire owned by a man who holds all the actual capital and commands the ultimate authority. Prince William is not just the heir to the throne. He is the landlord of the monarchy's private endeavours, controlling the vast agricultural lands, commercial properties, and financial portfolios that fund the family's operational costs. Camilla possesses no independent constitutional funding and no vast ancestral properties of her own to fall back on. By instituting the co-signature requirement, William legally, quietly, and permanently locked her out of the state's core machinery, replacing her illusion of absolute power with the stark reality of total dependency. As Camilla's shadow constitutional empire was quietly dismantled behind the oak doors of the council chamber, the physical and operational landscape within the palace began to immediately reflect the new order. This is where the silent execution of revenge translates into undeniable public reality. In the days following this internal crisis, viewers and royal analysts noticed a profound, subtle shift in how protocol is being weaponized across all sovereign spaces. The consequences of this constitutional blockade extend far beyond a single cancelled document. There's been a noticeable rigid change in vendor access, staff assignments, and administrative clearance. The privilege of utilizing royal resources to elevate the presence of Camilla's non-royal circle has been permanently restricted. Any future policy proposals or organizational changes emanating from the Queen's private office must now be routed through a grueling multi-level vetting process, managed entirely by William's constitutional teams, treated no differently than an external corporate application. Amidst this silent institutional reckoning, the presence of the Princess of Wales has become the ultimate undeniable contrast. Catherine did not need to issue a statement condemning the constitutional overreach, and she did not need to lobby the Privy Council for protection. She simply allowed the massive quiet weight of her own track record to protect the institution. While Camilla scrambled in desperation to manufacture a permanent foothold and alter state laws, Catherine emerged as a portrait of freezing aristocratic restraint. Catherine does not need to use her royal status to enrich her family or secure artificial power, because she understands the fundamental difference between public duty and private enterprise. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of the bloodline, and steadfast loyalty to the crown will always outmaneuver the unchecked ambition of outsiders. The visual shifts are becoming visible to anyone who knows how to read the subtle language of the palace. The true royals remain on the inside, holding the keys to the state machinery, while the liabilities are managed from the outside with strict requirements and revoked credentials. Catherine does not need to fight Camilla for dominance because her husband has already engineered the ultimate checkmate. The boundary has been drawn in permanent ink, and the true bloodline has been restored to its rightful, uncontested position at the center of the state. This brings us to the deeper tragic meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured intense public hatred, orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could secure her family's financial future and permanently alter the history of the dynasty in her own image. But what this story encoding the closed doors of the Privy Council proves is that the crown on Camilla's head is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable power, yet she is paralyzed by the operational reality that she is merely a temporary tenant in William's empire. She played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing everything for the ultimate title, only to realize too late that she cannot bring her family across the board. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her schemes, walled off from the state machinery and forced to live under the absolute unyielding corporate authority of the next generation. The era of the Shadow Queen attempting to restructure the monarchy is effectively over. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.